I had just returned from a friend's mother's 90th birthday party in Radom. And I remember looking at the clock, and it was 8:59 on the clock when I pulled out. And then I came home, and the football game was on. And I heard the bell ring, and it was after 9. So I said, oh, that's Carl Evan, because he always forgot his key. So I said, I'm not gonna get up. So I sat there. And then it rang again. So I finally got up and I went to the front door, and by that time they had gone, they heard the television, they were at the back door. So I'm standing with the door open, and then I see him come and I see the cops, and that really shocks me. And I do a mental check and I said, well, Lauren's here. And I said, it's Carl Evan. And then before I could ask a question, they told me, you know, that he was hit, that he was killed. It was a hit and run. You know, I didn't even have time to hope in between. I'll never forget that night. Carl was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, October 2nd, on one Saturday morning. We had gone to IHOP, and we had just been served, and then I started having labor pains, and off we zoomed in a lot of traffic, going up the expressway to Mount Auburn Hospital. Carl had the average childhood. He liked to do things that normal kids would do, ordinary kids would do, play with his friends. He had imaginary friends. He must have been, he was under, like 6 or 7 maybe. And we had gone to Wild World, an amusement park, and we were going on this sort of mini skirmish dervish or something like that. And we were sitting up front, and we would go up and down, and it was kind of frightening to him. He said, we were on it, he says, help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus. I'm thinking of his childhood nicknames, and he loved Mr. T on the A team, so I called him Mr. C. And then he was such a dear baby, I called him Eberhard. Because of his size, you would think he was just truly athletic ability, had a great athletic ability, but he really didn't. But he liked sports. He liked baseball, he played basketball, he did a little bit of soccer. Some of the best times I know were at the sports events. I remember the second year he was playing baseball, he had this team, Little League, and he had this in the minors, and he was on this team, and it had gone mid-season, and the last game before the mid-mark in the season, they hadn't won one game. So it was the last game, it was a 6-inning game, and his team was the home team, so they were up to bat, and they had the winning run on base, and up comes Carl. And I remember his father says, he's going to hit that ball. I said, well, how can you tell? He says, because he was skipping. And sure enough, he hit a double, and they ended up winning the game. So that was kind of fun. So all those memories, when I look back, everything he did was fun. He loved to do his comedy. That's something that he grew into. He had a good sense of humor, and he could come up with one-liners that would just crack you up at times. And he developed into maybe going into a lucrative pastime, but he used to do comedy acts around the area. He attended Brockton Public Schools. Then he went on to Massasoit and on to a degree at both Massasoit and at Bridgewater State. He had an abiding passion. The one thing he wanted was his college degree. And you know what? Learning was never easy for him. I mean, he had dyslexic, he had ADD, so everything was hard work for him, but he was determined to get it. In college, he liked a good discussion. Anything that had a good discussion about it. And his strength was his listening. And he could also, and then he could take it from there and develop his own thought and his line of thinking. And he loved, I have to say, his last years at Bridgewater, he was so proud of his degree at Bridgewater, and he had very fond memories. And he also was interested in sociology. He majored in sociology at Bridgewater, and with a focus, he always wanted to eventually open up some kind of youth center for, inner city boys. Basically, he was looking at youth, young men. And I remember he wrote a paper, he had researched that, and that was very interesting what he found out. And then when he was 16, he got a job at Shaw's. He was so excited because he had been looking for a job, and I remember the day he got it, and he comes running home. Ma, I got a job. Lattimore hooked me up at Shaw's. And he was there until he passed.
I met Carl at Shaw's when I started working there 13 years ago. He had just started working there a couple months before me, and we became good friends shortly after that.
I met Carl. I worked part-time with him at Shaw's, and we stayed friends throughout the whole duration.
Carl and I met approximately in 2004 when I was working at Shaw's Supermarkets.
I first met Carl when I was about 14 years old, working at the old Shaw's on Belmont Street.
I knew Carl for all of my life. I met him, well, how we actually met was our older sisters were good friends, Lee and my sister Nikki, and they hung out all the time. I met Carl when we were just kids.
I first saw Carl when my son was on the track team at Brockton High School. And Carl, who you wouldn't ordinarily, he was 6'8" and very heavy. He was a big man in a lot of different ways. I saw him running in the 100-yard dash. And I said to my son, "Who's that guy?" And he told me, "Oh, that's Carl Yancey." And then, I didn't think much more about it until several years later when he appeared in one of my classes, an American Lit class. One of the things I remember about his participation in that class was I was talking about how the Israelites elected their first king because he was taller than everyone else. He was stood head and shoulders above everyone else, Saul. And Carl piped up from the back of the room, "I think that's a pretty good idea." He used to stand in my office door, and when I was sitting down at my desk, I'd look up and see Carl standing there, and it looked like his head was just about to hit the top of the door frame.
After he finished Bridgewater, he went to work at the Goddard School. He went to work for Brockton Public Schools. He started at West and then got transferred to Goddard. And he also had picked up a job at the Y, at the Transition House, working with youth at there.
What is your emergency?
Yes, oh my God, someone was just hit by a car in front of 7-Eleven on Belmont Street in Brockton.
That night, I was picking up my wife from her work up in Stoughton, and we were driving home. My wife, I had my daughter with me. She was 2 at the time.
And we had gotten off the highway in Brockton to stop and get some food quickly.
Pulled in to where the Taco Bell is. After getting our food, we left. We're at the intersection across from West Street in Belmont Street.
And we heard a very, very loud bang.
We heard a loud bang.
In fact, at first I thought it was a gunshot.
We didn't happen to be looking in the direction at the time, but when we looked over to our left,
we saw a body coming down out of the air.
We saw Carl landing on the ground after being hit.
And hit the street.
Unfortunately, we didn't see the van because it was going away from us.
We were at a red light, but we just ran the red light and rushed over to him.
I had my wife call 911.
And he was just laying there in the street. It was awful.
I ran up to Carl. I had to direct traffic around him on Belmont Street. It was real dark.
But my husband, Steve, stayed with him.
And we waited there until the paramedics came. Just trying to see if there's any reaction from him.
My daughter was very upset because she had seen the whole thing when I was trying to comfort her.
But we stayed there. We gave our accounts to the police. We stayed with them and did what we could. I tried to do the best I could to figure out if there was anything I could help him with. I think it was very, very quick, very instant that when he was hit, when I got to him just a minute, not less than a minute later, I think he may have already not been there. He may have been gone.
I had just returned from a friend's mother's 90th birthday party in Radom. And I remember looking at the clock and it was 8:59, probably 8:55, 8:59 on the clock when I pulled out. And then I came home and the football game was on. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers were playing. And I heard the bell ring and it was after 9. So I said, oh, that's Carl Evan, because he always forgot his key. So I said, I'm not gonna get up. So I sat there and then it rang again. So I finally got up and I went to the front door, and by that time they had gone, they heard the television, they were at the back door. So I'm standing the door open, and then I see him come and I see the cops, and that really shocks me. And I do a mental check and I said, well, Lauren's here. And I said, it's Carl Evan. And then before I could ask a question, they told me, that he was hit, that he was killed, it was a hit and run. I didn't even have time to hope in between.
The night Carl was killed, I actually I read about it on Facebook.
I was on my phone on Facebook and I saw a post. I think it was either WCVB or Enterprise News, and it said somebody was was a hit and run on Belmont Street, and
had no idea it was him. And then obviously, I just read that a man was hit on Belmont Street, and of course I didn't think anything of it. I mean, it didn't mention his name or anything like that. Obviously in Brockton, things happen often, so I didn't really think anything of it, and I went to bed. Thought nothing of it, went to bed, and it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock, my phone kept ringing.
I woke up the next morning and I went on Facebook and people were writing, rest in peace, Carl. Thank you for the memories, I love you, and I thought it was a joke. I don't know, I thought I was dreaming. I don't know, I just thought I don't understand what was happening. It was just confusion.
About 5:30, my phone starts going off again, and I'm like, man, who's calling me? So I looked, and it was my cousin, and I picked it up because he doesn't call me that early. I picked it up, and he's like, hey, man, did you hear? And I'm like, hear what? And he's like, you don't know? And I said, no what? And he said, I don't want to be the one to tell you this. And I said, Chris, what's up? What happened? He goes, Carl died.
So at that point, I got a little nervous and I called Darwin Caffrey, who we're friends with, and I should say I texted him. I said, do you know what's happening? I mean, people are writing rest in peace to Carl, like what's going on? And he called me 2 minutes later and crying, and he was just like, Carl was hit, by a car and he passed away.
And I said, what do you mean Carl died? He said he got hit by a car on Belmont Street last night. And I hung up the phone and I tried to get out of bed and I couldn't. I started crying. And my daughters came in the room, they're like, Dad, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I couldn't talk, nothing. I just hit the floor. I called my wife and she was on the train. And I managed to tell her, I said, you gotta come home. Carl got killed, Carl died. And she came home and that was the morning that the morning after he died. And that's how we found out.
And I just almost dropped to the ground. It was just awful. At that point, I didn't know what I told my parents. I told everybody. First thing I did was drive to Daryl's house at 9, and so I knocked at the door. I didn't see anybody there, and it's hard to say. So she hugged me and said, he's gone, my boy's gone. And so I spent the entire day there.
The night Carl was killed, I worked with him earlier that day, and I got out of work at 8. He was supposed to get out of work at 9. I gave him a call around 9:30. He didn't pick up his phone, and I just didn't think anything of it. Went to bed, woke up from my friend Christopher. He was outside ringing my doorbell. He was I think he was throwing rocks at my window and just trying to get my attention. I woke up.
I was asleep when it happened, and I got a call from Ruben, and it had to have been, it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't remember exactly when, but it was around that time. And I knew if Ruben was calling me, something had to have happened, because if you know Ruben like I do, he is not usually awake, especially that late. So I picked up immediately. I'm glad I didn't hit him up in the morning, but he had informed me that there was an accident, and when I asked, "What do you mean?" he was like, "Carl got hit," and I could tell he was still kind of in shock and in disbelief, because I had to ask the questions to really pull it out of him. And he was like, "Carl got hit by a car," and I was like, "Oh my God, is he okay?" And then Ruben just told me, "No, he's gone."
I didn't believe it. I was like, because I had just woken up, I didn't believe it. I was like, no way, you guys are messing with me. I thought they were just messing around, and I could tell he was he wasn't kidding. I could tell. I went and woke up my girlfriend. I woke her up and I told her, and we just kind of just sat there for maybe 10 minutes. I forgot to even buzz my friend Chris in. We just sat there and went back outside, and we went straight to his mother's house.
So immediately after that, I got in my car and I drove to Carl's house, where everybody seemed to have gathered. Ruben was there, our friend Will, Chris Boucher was there, and Carl's mother, was there, obviously. I don't think it really hit me yet that what happened had actually happened. It's when she broke down that it really hit me that Carl was gone.
From there, it was, you're standing there in disbelief at what you heard, and I wish I'd never opened that door. From there, our lives were changed forever. I remember my daughter, everybody was sleeping, my daughter, granddaughter, who were living here, and then my husband. I just started hollering out, and they came down. We made the phone calls, and all I wanted to do is get in that car and get on the open highway and just drive and drive. And I thought, I want to get out of Brockton. And then I said to myself, you know what? I'm never going in Shaw's again. Never going in. But when I got up that next morning, the 2 places that I went were to Shaw's, and I just wanted to walk in there, and then I went over to his school. I just had the desire to go there to places that he loved.
Carl was the type of person who would give you the shirt off of his back if you needed it. There is no, when people die, everybody says, oh, he was a great person or she was a great person. There is no person better than Carl. Carl was the most giving, thoughtful. He just, there's no words can explain the type of person he was. Back when I was doing music all the time, I was doing shows all the time, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Boston, around here locally, and there's so many times that Carl would come out to the show with me, and my wife always came to the shows, and I never liked bringing her because she'd obviously be in the crowds. But every time Carl was there, man, he was like our personal bodyguard. Just always knew where she was, because if I looked out in the crowd, Carl was hard to miss. You could see him right there, and there was my wife standing right in front of him, and yeah, it was just he was just one of a kind. He was just like a brother to me. He honestly was, and you know, it's definitely, my life's definitely missing something since he left, that's for sure.
He had all types of friends from all different backgrounds. And I remember I could hear him on the phone saying, "Stay black, stay black." That was his phrase. He would say that often. Goals in life, well, one of them he did achieve. He wanted that college degree, and thank God he got that. And he wanted to go on and work more with youth. Like I said, setting up some kind of youth program, after school program. You know, he had a passion. He loved helping people. He had great, you know, he never had any money, and I could never understand why he didn't have any money until when he passed, I realized he was giving all his money away. You know, he was very compassionate, and I know his friend told me that, you know, he saw him give money for the homeless to buy food.
I'd like to just share a story about Carl on one night that we went out in the city, and it's kind of a night that we go around the city and we just pray for people, or just try to just bless people that are out on the streets at night. And so it's one night we started our walk, and I remember talking to Carl and explaining about what we do. And I'll never forget just looking at him and seeing this big man and how childlike he was, though, because he was so excited, because it was the first time he was doing this. And I explained about some of the encounters we've had with different people and how we've been able to bless people different ways and stuff. And I just remember him just seeming excited. And so we started our walk, and we wound up on Legion Parkway, and we met two people that were sitting on a bench right by the neighborhood health center, two homeless people, and we just started talking to them. And as we were talking to them, one of the gentlemen, you know, we asked them if they were hungry, and they said yes. And then we wound up offering them a bite to eat at the Panda Express, which I thought was interesting, because Carl was known as the Panda Man, and here we are at Panda Express now, and we ordered some food for these two gentlemen. And as we're sitting there, we're just talking to them and asking how they're doing. And one of the gentlemen actually was big fella, just like Carl, was just explaining to him how his feet hurt. Now, he's been walking throughout the city all day, and he's got work shoes on. So he was talking about how his feet were hurting, and Carl just immediately asked him, like, "What size are you?" And the gentleman said size 15. And immediately Carl just left the restaurant, and he left me there with these two gentlemen. I'm turning to him, I was like, where did he go? He just literally without hesitation, just got up, left. And within like minutes, he came back in. And what did he have in his hands but a pair of sneakers that he took out of his car. And of all sizes, they were the exact size 15 that this gentleman needed. And he gave him those sneakers. And I just remember this gentleman just putting them sneakers on, and they fit him, and he wore them. And I remember Carl just feeling so excited and that he was able to do that. And the thing I loved about Carl is, again, there was no hesitation. He just did it. It was like, there was no thought about, well, should I give him my sneakers? He didn't even think about it, he just did it. And I just love that about him. You know, and we had a chance to, you know, just to talk some more with these two gentlemen, and then we prayed for them. We left the restaurant and we were outside, and, you know, we were excited about what just happened. And we were ready to call it a night because it was getting close to dark. And Carl was like, no, let's walk some more, you know. So we spent a good hour after that just walking through the city. and just looking for opportunities to do more. And that's what I remember about Carl. And, I didn't know him for a long time, but just the moments that I was with him, he just leaves an impact with you. He just left that impact of like, wow, what a good man.
Something that Carl did that sticks right into my mind. A lot of memories are based out of Boy Scout camp, and there was this one time where there was a large storm at the camp, and he helped mobilize the unit that was at the campsite and helped grab kids and their things and helped move them down to a shelter. And while we were at the shelter, his comedic genius and fun-loving attitude really calmed everybody down during this storm. So it was quite impressive.
He had a car, I can't remember what it was a Dodge, and we were taking turns again picking each other up, and he picked me up at Massasoit. He picked me up at home, and we were actually over here on Belmont, over by, I think there's it's T-Mobile or a mobile store now. It used to be a Hess gas station. And we got that far, and Carl's car broke down, and we're out in the middle of the street, and we pushed it into the law office. And I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Well, I'll get it fixed or something." So I said, "All right." So I forget what happened. Maybe my mother picked us up. I can't remember. And then we went to school. And I remember it was like 3-4 weeks. Every day I drove by, that car was still in the parking lot. He never did anything with it. I think he just left it there, and somebody just took it to the junkyard. But that was him. That was Carl.
My greatest memory of Carl, first of all, he was a phenomenal human being. He was wonderful, he was kind, he was sweet, he was everything that a mother would want in her son. He was a wonderful young man. My most wonderful memory of Carl is when I broke my pelvic. Carl was always there for me. And when I broke my pelvic 3 years ago, he happened to call me, and he would call me and he would always say, "God is good." That's how he would start our conversations. And he said, "What's going on, girl?" I said, "I broke my pelvic and I'm home." And he was like, "You broke your pelvic?" He said, "Oh my goodness." He said, "Are you home by yourself?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'll be there at lunchtime." And I was like, "Don't come over here at lunchtime. I'm gonna be asleep." And the next day, he didn't come over that day, but the very next day he came and he brought me lunch, because he knows that my favorite place to eat lunch, my favorite is the Supreme down the street. Their steak and cheese sub. So he brought me that the first day. He stopped and got me some things from the grocery store that I didn't ask him to bring, but he brought them anyway. And he did that. I was home for 3 months, and he must have stopped by my house at least 8 times. And then he did things around my house, like a light bulb was blown, and he went down to my basement and got my ladder, came up. And I didn't even ask him. He's like, "Where's your ladder?" I went down, got the ladder, brought it upstairs, changed my light bulb.
He knew that I write, so he one day he said, "What are you writing now?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing a novel. It's a sequel to a Vietnam novel that I wrote a number of years ago." And he said, "Can you put me in it?" And I thought for a minute, and I said, "Yeah, I guess I could." And he says, "All right, I want you to call me Lamont." So I wrote this character who is a 6'8" man named Lamont into the book. And the last time I saw Carl, as a matter of fact, I asked him if we could get together for coffee. I wanted him to read what I'd written about him. It's not really about him, but it's just it was his request, and this is kind of a walk-on character for this novel. And before we had a chance to get together to look at that, I heard on the news the day after that he had been killed crossing the street. It was a terrible tragedy for the city, and it still is. It's one of the things that I think bothers everyone in Brockton who knew Carl, which is just about everyone. He was very active in his church, in several places that he worked, the school where he worked. Everyone's had some kind of contact with Carl Yancey. He was just a big, friendly, generous man.
People would actually come specifically to that supermarket to see him. They wouldn't go there just to shop. There were so many different options, and frankly even less expensive options in the area where people could go shop, but everybody went to Shaw's to see Carl. Carl didn't do very much. he could get away with walking around with a mop and not actually mopping. But you know, like, he kind of became the face of that supermarket. He was such an integral part of the community that people just wanted to be around him. You know, he was infectious. Like, you could hear his laugh from the opposite side of the store, and that was enough to make your day, even if you've had a pretty bad one.
We were mall rats, you know, so mall rats meaning when we were young, like 14, we would go to the Braintree Mall and just hang around the mall, and like every single, it almost felt like all these 14-year-olds were, you know, from Holbrook and Braintree and all these surrounding areas would go too, and there were a bunch of us, and we would go every weekend, every Friday night and Saturday night. That's how we spent our weekends, and you know, just everybody was drawn to him. He was everybody wanted to hang around with him, and if he didn't go, I would go anyway, or with some of our other friends, and you know, where's Carl? Where's Carl? Where's Carl? And you know, again, it just speaks to how the magnetic personality that he had. You know, everybody just was drawn to him. Everyone wanted to be around him. I was blessed to know him. I really was. I miss him every day. Yeah, I'm blessed to have known him.
Carl was also the very first person that I came out to. And mind you, like, I'm totally proud of who I am today. I have no qualms with being gay, but you know, in the early 2000s, it was still a little difficult to be gay. You know, it was really difficult to be gay in an urban area. But Carl was the first person I told, and he was also so accepting. And you know, he actually slapped me across the face. You know, when I was like, what is that for? Like, I thought our friendship was over because, you know, when you're coming out, you don't really think things rationally. And he was just like, I'm slapping you because you don't think you're worth. No, he said, I'm slapping you because you don't know your worth. He was like, it doesn't matter. Like, he was like, the fact that you felt the need to hide that, that's the only thing that you should be ashamed of. And Carl also helped me come out to our other group of friends, all of whom were very accepting, and you know, like, he was such a big monumental part of that side of me, coming to terms with who I am and living as my authentic self. Frankly, I don't think I could have done it without him. You know, not a day goes by that I don't think about him.
His friend Lorne came to me before his funeral, and he said that when he and Carla, at some time in their life, they made this agreement, this pact, that if anything happened to either one of them, the other would take care of his family. So he comes to me and he tells me about it, and he tells me what he has planned. And it turns out to be an extremely successful event. It was over at Sticks and Stones in Abington. It was just a fundraiser, and it was a lot of good times, a lot of Carl's friends. And we had it the second year, we had our second one, and I'm looking forward to the third one. And with the funds we did, half of it, he said, was for Carl Evans' children's college fund, where Carl Evans had none. And Simone, he only had Simone, and her father had passed, so the money they raised will go for her education. The other half I've given out to charities that he was involved with or would hold dear. So the third one's coming up. Usually we have it the Saturday before Thanksgiving. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's just a good time with good people. Carl Evans knew some wonderful, wonderful people. And I'll have to tell you, there's some great people in the city of Brockton.
After Carl died, we had a little agreement back when we were in our younger days that if something ever happened to himself or myself, that the other would take care of the other. Obviously, I had kids. He didn't have kids yet, but he did have a niece. And I told him that, you know, we told each other if something was to happen to one of us, we'd both look out for the families of whatever happened. And that's so when he passed away, that was the first thing that crossed my mind after I wiped my eyes and stopped crying. You know, we put on a benefit for him at Sticks and Stones in Abington, where people donated different stuff for raffles and stuff like that, and we sold raffle tickets. We raised a decent amount of money. I don't remember what the exact figures were off the top of my head, but we were able to raise a decent amount of money for his niece, and we did it 2 years in a row, and couldn't ask for a better turnout either year. It was just a good time and celebrating Carl's life and what he meant to everybody.
I remember right after the next evening, Brett had arranged a vigil, and I went down there, and I mean, there were like hundreds of people I heard. I mean, there are a lot of people. And then I had a friend who conducted, and people would give up and give testimonies, and I was standing there in awe. I heard just things that my mouth just dropped at the things that he was doing for people. They spoke very highly of him, and it was so heartwarming. And since then, we have the vigils annually. This year, I had a virtual one, and I do have a tape where we put it on that night because of the pandemic. I didn't want people to meet down there. But prior to that, 7-Eleven has closed, but we had one ever since it's closed, and I'll have it again if necessary down there.
I'm a private investigator. I was hired by Carl Yancey. She's the mother of Carl Yancey, who was killed in a tragic hit-and-run accident quite a few years ago on Belmont Street in Brockton, Route 123. I was hired because the case came up cold. I began working the case. Through my sources and outside sources, I began following up a lead after being hired by Carl Yancey, which is Carl's mom. After my sources, outside sources and my own sources, I concluded or began to conclude that the car or minivan headed east on Belmont Street 123 towards the center of Brockton. I believe it took a right at the Sunoco, which is still Route 123, took a right, went around the back of the Sunoco, which is towards Forest Ave, and then a left behind the Sunoco, and another left towards the fairgrounds, Brockton Fairgrounds, and then another left towards Route 123, again Belmont Street, heading east. I believe the car ended up downtown Brockton, where it possibly resided, or the owner of the car resided, with a second occupant in the car. The owner of the car and the VIN, with my investigation, I believe the car might have been at some point totaled through them or someone else, and the car was sold with a salvage title. That car, I believe, was then sold with a salvage title and ended up in the Methuen area. And a gentleman in the Methuen area, I believe, either owned a pizza shop or he was a delivery person for a pizza shop. I went up to Methuen, and that's how we concluded with that. After going to Methuen and speaking to some people up there, that car that I believe it to be an Odyssey, was then sold, and it transferred up into Maine. After going up into Maine, unfortunately, I did run out of resources, and I believe the car or still is in Maine. With that, finding the car, it's nearly impossible to get rid of all DNA. So that's where I ended up. If we could find that car, we could maybe getting some DNA and finding out, bringing that car back and determining possibly who that suspect is.
What would I say to the person who hit and killed Carl Levin? And the only thing, and I've said it before, I can say is have the courage to turn yourself in. I believe there was a passenger. That's my personal opinion, that there was a passenger in the car. So somebody knows something. And it's a terrible secret to have to keep. And I just hope, I hope that we'll bring some closure to this. I do believe that we will find out who killed Carl Levin. I really do believe that. It's taken longer than I thought, but I believe we will find out.
Damn, man. I ain't never wanted to do a song like this, man. Never.
Yeah. Wish I was living a lie. Wish I didn't have to fake it. Wish when shots was in front of me, I didn't have to take it. Wish I didn't have pain that needed to be dulled. Wish I didn't self-medicate, but still I indulge. It's been a minute since we kick it. Find it hard to look at pictures, hear your voice in the distance. That's my constant contradiction. I wish your memory would fade and take my pain away, but then I turned around, gave my son a part of your name. They said I'll use your name for fame. They get dead that shit. I slapped the taste out his mouth. Yeah, I said that shit. I'm finally in a position to prove nothing to no one. It's still the world and that attitude's in no one. Look, I feel I owe you something. Come back for a minute. Give me 5, let me know when you're coming. Wish I made time sooner. Wish my schedule wasn't packed. Wish I didn't let you down and wish I always had your back. This the truth, man, I know that it hurts. I'm trying to turn back time, but that clock won't work. I remember rocking stages out of state with you there, and Kay would stand by your side cause she was safe when you near. You wouldn't die for my wife, and I let them take your life. Feeling like a piece of shit, I went to bed that night. Man, I wish that car swerved and it totally missed, or I was there to flip it over on some Superman shit. I could've stayed with you and blew breath in your lungs and held you down while you were scared and gave your chest a few pumps. They told me over time, man, them wounds will heal, but they seem to rip open every time I hear that voicemail. I try to write you in the page, say blank. My son made it out the hospital, it's you, I think. I'm left with nothing now, memories and bad decisions. To tell the truth, I'm trying to figure how I'm still living. And since he gone, I'm trying to find the words to say. You broke your promise to me, man. You said you'd be a call away.
Words can't express the way I'm feeling, bro. Miss you like crazy. Love you, homie. Till we meet again.
Yo, Lorne, this is Carl. Just checking up, see how you are, fam. So just hear an email, just a phone call away, alright, my nigga? Love you. Peace.